In so many of the stories I've shared about Jesus, he is lifting people up. In the church, we have a name for that. It's resurrection, or the person who does it might be a redeemer, someone who exchanges what was old for something new, for exchanges old life for new life, exchanges death for new life. It's the same continuation of what God was doing with Job. Remember the end of that story where God gave him new life, even in the midst of loss. Well, Jesus, I shared earlier, restored lepers back to their lives, gave them their lives back by healing them. He also did this with a woman who'd been bent over for 18 years. No one had been able to help her. And Jesus said, "You are set free." And he laid his hands on her, and she stood up straight for the very first time in decades. And she praised God. She was so happy that she had her life back again instead of having to always look down all of the time. She could look up and ahead and forward again. But even this was rebellious. Jesus happened to do this on the Sabbath, and that was the day when you weren't supposed to work, when you weren't even supposed to heal and do things like that. But Jesus refused to take a break, to not lift people up when they're in need. Another time, Jesus was out teaching and preaching and healing and got word that his friend Lazarus was sick. And Jesus, though it was a risk to go visit Lazarus in Bethany, he went anyway. And when he got there, he found out that Lazarus was already dead. And he comforted his other friend, Martha, Lazarus' sister. And he told her, "He will rise again, Martha." And Martha, as anyone in grief will say, "Well, I know on the last day he will." But it didn't change her grief in that moment, and understandably. And so Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, they will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die." And he looks Martha in the eye and says, "Do you believe that?" And she says the most amazing, wonderful confession of faith, even in the midst of her grief and pain. She says, "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God." Well, Martha and her other sister Mary took Jesus to the tomb. And then Jesus did the most remarkable thing when he got there. He cried. Jesus was moved to tears because he cared about Lazarus. God gets moved to tears over one person, every person. Now, this time, God's tears didn't flood the world. They moved God to action. And so Jesus commanded those who were there to take away the stone. Now they protested because Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days already. Already there was a stench of decomposition. There was no hope in that place. There was no chance that they made a mistake, that he was in a coma or just had a really faint heartbeat. He was dead, dead, dead. And yet Jesus insisted. And eventually they rolled away the stone, and Jesus stood at the mouth of the tomb. In those days, they were cut from the earth themselves, like a stone or a cave. And Jesus said, "Lazarus, come out." And there was this awkward pause until Lazarus came out. Lazarus still wrapped in the burial shroud, the bands of cloth all the way around him, holding him tight and confined. And Jesus said, "Unbind him." And would you believe it? Lazarus lived. He lived, though he would die another day. But this is a sign of the work that God does, of God's power of resurrection and new life. But I will tell you that power that Jesus showed that day, it threatened and it scared those who were in authority, those who had power of their own, and they wanted to get rid of Jesus even more after that day. And so this act of resurrection leads Jesus even closer to the cross and to his own resurrection, to the promise of our resurrection. Because even when Jesus is threatened, even when Jesus threatens others by lifting people up, God simply doubles down in redeeming life. For everyone who lives and believes in him will never truly die.